Remember when 5 Big 12 schools nearly bolted for the Big 10? And how much more fun would this be if Oklahoma was in the Big 10 West and could play in Ohio State in a conference championship? Let's talk about it after the bumper.
Don't be cornering me. Hold up. Time. You gotta help me with that corner shit.
What's up, kinfolk? It's RJ Young. I am not on a step mill. Consider hitting the like and subscribe button because I upload a video every single day. It's always college football related, sports related. We have a good time. And one of the things I was thinking about earlier today was how much fun it would be if Oklahoma was in the Big Ten West. It's because that would mean that they would come out of the Big Ten West and perhaps play Ohio State, maybe Michigan, maybe Penn State in the Big Ten championship game, right? What if Michigan State was actually decent, right? And then I was looking at it, and there's 14 teams in that league already. And at a time before they added Maryland and Rutgers, they were really sincerely, June 2010, thinking about adding Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Nebraska, Missouri, others to the fold, right? And we talk about West Virginia being a part of the Big 12. How wild would it be for Texas Hill Country to be in the Big 10? Also, the revenue sharing aspect of this would be tremendous, right? The Big Ten splits about $50 million among its member institutions. That is more than the SEC, which splits about $44 million, and obviously more than the Big 12, which splits about 35 to 38, depending on whether or not you are OU or Kansas. And they couldn't make that work, right? Money is always going to be the hang up for almost every business venture because you can make almost anything else work if the money is right for everyone involved. And in this case, it was right for Nebraska. It was not right for Oklahoma. And so we get Missouri and Texas A&M going to the SEC at a time when we all thought that Texas might have been bolting for the Pac-10. Many folks thinking at the time that Oklahoma and Texas are a package deal when that's not necessarily true because they don't necessarily need each other to thrive. They need to play that game, I think. But then again, I thought Oklahoma needed to play Nebraska to be, really cool. Turns out Oklahoma's doing just fine. Nebraska, on the other hand, has been struggling since the move from the Big 12 when they played in a conference championship game against Texas, right? Maybe you wanted to stay in the Big 12 North, and then that would have been that. But now I'm thinking like when we get conference realignment again, which I really believe is going to happen when these contracts end because of the state of the pandemic, but also the state of the money, right? Oklahoma and Texas are carrying this podunk conference called the Big 12. Texas from a revenue standpoint, where it makes more money than anybody else in the union. We're talking about their athletic programs. And Oklahoma from a pride standpoint in that it wins the league and is the representative of the college football playoff at a time when the Pac-12 can't consistently get one in there. So as much shade as people want to throw at Oklahoma for not having won a college football playoff semifinal game, they do make the game. And they do make the game because they win the games, right? 12-2, 12-2, 12-2 in Lincoln Riley's 3 years as head coach. And before that, it wasn't as if Bob Stoops didn't lead him to a Sugar Bowl against Auburn and then, playing in the college football playoff for that. So I thought it was interesting to take a look at what it would mean for Oklahoma to join the Big Ten West because I don't think that you bring Texas. I think Texas would do their own thing, maybe join the SEC, maybe be in the Pac-12. But if they did, that would be phenomenal because you could put Texas over there in the Big 12 or Big Ten East, right? And then you could have OU and Texas in a conference championship game. It's not because, or you could flip them, right? You could put Oklahoma in the Big Ten East with Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. But I think that gets pretty top heavy because over in that West Division, your name brands are really just Nebraska, Wisconsin. Like Minnesota is on the door, but I don't think they're there. The same thing with a Purdue, right? You're not really thinking about these squads as much as in football. You're not thinking about Indiana in football. You're not really thinking about Michigan State as much as you should in football because Michigan is, the football school in Michigan. And to a point, they're the basketball school in Michigan. Even as Tom Izzo continues to get lots of headlines and recruit well, it ain't like he's winning a bunch of national championships or making a bunch of Final Fours. You know what I mean? So that said, I thought perhaps it would have been interesting for us to all take a look at what that might mean because if Oklahoma would join the Big Ten, you no longer have to do this thing where you have to worry about whether or not you win the conference championship game if you're Ohio State or Oklahoma and not make the college football playoff. You would be on that cusp with the SEC where we might even think about putting in the folks that make that game, let alone the one that won it, Whereas Oklahoma and Ohio State have nudged each other out of some things, right? So like 2018 famously, if Ohio State doesn't get beat by 28 by Purdue, they're probably in that college football playoff game instead of Oklahoma in a year where they were basically 1-for-1. Like they were 1-to-1 in the ratio. Meanwhile, the Pac-12 gets beat over the head once again because the Big Ten would have just gotten stronger and there would be no question as to which one is the second best league in all of football and has an opportunity to unseat the SEC with its really good 14-team league, right? Meanwhile, Clemson continues to have to win the ACC, and you're not necessarily thinking that the ACC gets a team into the college football playoff as it stands, right? If they don't go undefeated, right? Because we all believe that the ACC is kind of a watered-down conference. But now that we're talking about college football playoff expansion, it might be that you can get one from every conference at a minimum, plus your independents like Notre Dame. You might end up with a USC or an Oregon or Arizona State also in there. But I think when you talk about getting the footprint and getting the money back in, it's worth having a conversation about perhaps bringing Oklahoma and Oklahoma State to the Big Ten. Oklahoma State might be in the Big Ten East, right? Because if you put Oklahoma State in the Big Ten West, the West continues to look crappy and it gets a little bit more lopsided when we're talking about the brands and the fan bases. And you really want that Big Ten game, Big Ten national champion or Big Ten championship game to be worthy of a national championship, right? You want it on par with the SEC, where it's LSU and Georgia is a de facto play-in for the national championship game, and both are capable of winning the national championship, and you get Alabama coming out of the West, you get perhaps a Florida coming out of the East. You can continue to go down the list of perhaps teams in the SEC, Auburn, right, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, that have that experience. Like at one point, Ole Miss and Mississippi State were number 2, number 3 in the country. Then you add in there that Texas A&M, for many people, is a sleeping giant because they have so much money and they have Jimbo Fisher, but I don't think that they're there yet. And then Tennessee is building, right? They got a top 3 recruiting class in 2021. They haven't lost a game since October. Really, it's just Vanderbilt and Kentucky over there that are going to bring you down. I mean, Vanderbilt's contribution to the SEC is that of a toddler who is pushing a semi behind 5 world strongmen. It's just kind of there, not really doing anything. Matter of fact, take a seat. Don't hurt yourself. That's how we feel about Vanderbilt, right? I think also if you get Oklahoma in there, you're bringing in a portion of the South. You're bringing in what I think is the best women's gymnastics program and one of the best men's gymnastics program to compete with a really good gymnastics program in Michigan. Also softball, right? Best softball program in the country is at Oklahoma. Michigan wants to be there, right? They have been to the Women's College World Series year in, year out. They're decent enough. Same thing with Minnesota. They're decent enough. And Ohio State with wrestling, and Oklahoma with wrestling, and Oklahoma State with wrestling. I think there's a lot to be gained here when we talk about perhaps Oklahoma looking at the Big Ten. Now, I've also said that Oklahoma could be looking at the SEC, right? What I'm saying is I don't expect Oklahoma to stay in the Big 12. I just don't see it, right? And I think that's kind of my point here, and that's what I wanted to walk out. So let me know what you think in the comments below. All right, deuces.